Good evening. My name is Cameron Ingram. I'm the Executive Director for North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. I would like to welcome each and every one of you that is here tonight. I appreciate y'all coming out to learn more about chronic wasting disease and how it affects this community and the implementations of regulations that we'll be doing across this region. But again, thank you so much for being here. We look forward to engaging with you, and we'll roll out the specifics on how we're going to do that as we move on. I wanted to start tonight by telling y'all what the mission of the Wildlife Resources Commission is. The mission of the Wildlife Commission is to conserve North Carolina's wildlife resources and their habitats, and to provide programs and opportunities for hunters, anglers, boaters, and other outdoor enthusiasts to enjoy wildlife-associated recreation. Unfortunately, North Carolina has been added as the 29th state to test positive for chronic wasting disease. But we've been working diligently in the past 20 years to prepare for this moment. We are committed to the mission of conserving the wildlife resources of this state, and we will take we will take on the information from all the other states that have implemented these regulations in the past, and we'll learn from them as we implement our measures here to slow the spread of chronic wasting disease in the state of North Carolina. We will work with our hunters, we will follow the science, and we will protect the rich hunting traditions and heritage in this state of North Carolina. The goals tonight is us to educate our constituents and to ensure this community that we're here for the long term, that we will protect the wildlife resources of this state, and that we look forward to getting feedback from you. At this time, I would like to introduce a few of our guests tonight. First off, we've got Representative Jay Adams, who is the chair of the Wildlife House Committee in the North Carolina General Assembly. Thank you, Jay, for being here. Okay. Chairman Monty Crump of the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission, District 6 representative. We've got the District 7, this is District 7, the Wildlife Commissioner, Jim Ruffin, up front. And we really look forward to tonight. So at this time, I'm going to ask Brad Howard, the Chief of our Wildlife Management Division, to come up and get us started.
Thanks, Director Ingram. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you for your interest. I'm sorry that we have to be here to talk about this, but you know, here we are. We are now the 29th state. So we're going to try to have an organized process tonight. I just wanted to let you know that this is being broadcast across Facebook Live from Carolina Sportsman. So that's the reason you got the index cards and those kind of things. So the questions, you put your questions on the cards, so that we can make sure everybody out there in Facebook land, as well as here, can hear the questions, and we'll try to answer them back. We've got a set of questions that were submitted. We had the comment portal open, and we know some questions that everybody's got. But we're going to start tonight with a few presentations that we hope to help let you learn a little bit more about CWD and our process and what's fixing to happen to all of us deer hunters, and how we're going to work together to try to do what we can to combat this disease in North Carolina. So I'm going to start with our state deer biologist, Mariah Vargas, and Mariah's going to come up and first show our No CWD video, and then he's going to give a presentation about CWD. I'm not sure.
Chronic wasting disease, or CWD, is the biggest disease threat to North Carolina's white-tailed deer population and our state's rich deer hunting heritage. CWD affects deer and related species such as elk, moose, and caribou. It spreads easily and is always fatal. CWD is a slow killer. It takes over a year for an infected deer to show visible signs of illness. This can appear as listlessness or lack of coordination, excessive urination and drooling, and a severe decline in body weight. By the time these signs appear, death is near. CWD is spread easily between deer through direct contact in their environment and is caused by abnormal proteins or prions that slowly build up in a deer's nervous system, eventually causing brain damage and death. There is no vaccine, treatment, or cure. CWD prions are shed in an infected animal's saliva, urine, and body tissues, well before the animal starts to show any signs of sickness. Prions are spread as deer move through their environment and can hitchhike to new locations when people transport infected animals, their carcasses, or high-risk parts. Once in the environment, these prions can last in the soil for decades. They can survive fire and freezing temperatures and still infect new deer. Fortunately, CWD prions don't seem to cause sickness in humans, at least for now. But the closely related prions that cause mad cow disease have shown they can infect humans. What can we do now that CWD has been detected in North Carolina? Hunters, cooperators, and wildlife officials must work together to slow the spread. In states that have had CWD the longest, hunters are already seeing its negative impact, including fewer deer, fewer mature bucks, and harvested animals that shouldn't be consumed. In some areas of these states, over half of the adult bucks tested are positive for CWD. Hunters in these areas are facing the reality that their hunting traditions will never be the same. Hunters can do their part by following North Carolina's carcass importation laws. It is against the law to import whole deer carcasses or high-risk parts. When importing carcass parts into the state, only transport deboned meat and finished mounts, hides, or skulls with all other tissues removed. All imported parts must be labeled with your name, address, hunting license number, the state or county where the animal was harvested, and the date of harvest. Whenever possible, field dress deer at the site of harvest and dispose of unused parts so they are out of reach for deer and scavengers. If you see something, say something. Reporting illegal importation of live deer, whole carcasses, and high-risk parts helps keep CWD from spreading to new areas. The best tool we have to fight CWD is knowing where it is and slowing its spread. There is no reliable live test for CWD, so finding it on the landscape means testing animals once they're dead, including hunter harvests. The North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission is making it more convenient for hunters to help by adding more locations where they can donate a tissue sample from their harvest. CWD testing drop-off stations allow hunters to make donations at any time. Donating a deer head is fast and easy. If you have a successful hunt this season, please do your part to help find and manage CWD. Together, we can fight this threat to our white-tailed deer and help preserve North Carolina's hunting tradition for generations to come. For more information about North Carolina's CWD monitoring efforts, including where you can donate a sample, visit ncwildlife.org/CWD.
All right, good afternoon. Brad introduced me. My name is Mariah Vargas, the deer biologist for the commission. Before we got started, I just wanted to say I actually had the privilege of growing up 30 minutes up the road from here and just outside of Elkin. Learned to hunt there, was introduced to the outdoors, and really fostered a love for these awesome animals, white-tailed deer. Went on to college to study them, and it point is it started my career path and my life path, because I love this animal, and I feel very privileged today to be able to come and talk to everyone in my home area about white-tailed deer and chronic wasting disease, which is very important to the conservation of the species long term. I wanted to put our newest detection, our first detection here in Yadkin County in perspective. First, this is a map of the United States and where chronic wasting disease has been detected. As the video mentioned, it was first found out west. You can see large outbreaks in southern Canada, in the American West. But in recent years, CWD has, of course, been spreading eastward over time, and in recent years, it's been getting closer and closer to North Carolina. And that's why we're all here today. It's finally been detected in North Carolina, in Yadkin County. So what does that mean for hunting here? And that's what I would like to talk about today and hopefully shed some light on, because I'm a deer hunter, and every year I hunt Wilkes County, and I love it. It's my favorite hunt of the year. When hunters here in Yadkin County, which is a great deer hunting county, of course, we have a lot of deer. When you all take to the woods this year, there's going to be plenty of deer like there's always been. I can assure you, you're probably not going to see any more sick deer than you have in years past. At face value, looking at the deer herd, they will look healthy. And that's the dangerous thing about chronic wasting disease, is that it's a very slow-building disease. It's very difficult to detect. But in the long term, it can have dire consequences for the population, the productivity of the population, and for future generations of hunters. I think everyone here, myself, are invested in hunting as a pastime and the great resources that it manages and, of course, the benefits that it provides to hunters. And we want to pass that on to future generations. And chronic wasting disease is important because what we do today will have implications for future generations and their deer hunting. Not so much our deer hunting today, but our actions today will impact them. Before we got too far into this, I just want to contrast CWD with a very common disease across the southeastern United States, and that's hemorrhagic disease, commonly known as blue tongue or EHD. Hunters in this part of North Carolina have experienced hemorrhagic disease outbreaks in years past. You've probably smelled the dead deer along creeks in years when we've had an outbreak in late summer. EHD is endemic to the southeast, meaning it's been here for hundreds of years. As long as people have been monitoring deer populations, they've noted EHD outbreaks. Yet we still have a thriving deer population because white-tailed deer in southeast North America are adapted to EHD, blue tongue. And EHD, unlike CWD, does not kill all deer it infects. The animals that do survive EHD have immunity to the disease for future years. But what this means is if you have an EHD year like we did in 2012, I remember that very vividly, within a few years the population started jumping back. And right now, if you were to walk outside, we have a lot of deer, even though we had a really big EHD year then. The population bounces back because they're adapted. CWD is very different in that it's a very permanent disease. And the prevalence, or the percentage of the population that has the disease, only increases over time. So if, let's say that only 1 or 2% of the population have the disease this year, and in future years, that number will just get higher, meaning that over time, it affects more and more animals in the population. Every deer that becomes infected with CWD eventually dies. There's no recovery from the disease. What this means is that long-term, CWD has much more impactful implications for white-tailed deer management than EHD does, because it is permanent. So what does a CWD deer look like? I know we're probably all asking this question knowing that the disease is here now. What can you expect? Well, if you were to search the internet, you would come up with a lot of pictures like this. In general, headlines show pictures of sick-looking deer, deer that are obviously ill. But oftentimes that's not the case with chronic wasting disease, at least in the early stages. In fact, this deer in the top left, it had an injury to the head from being hit by a car. The deer in the bottom left, it had hemorrhagic disease and it had just never fully recovered. The deer on the right has succumbed to chronic wasting disease. It's also skinny like the other two deer. My point in showing these three is that there are a lot of different diseases and injuries to deer that can cause them to be emaciated and acting abnormally. So just because they're acting abnormally doesn't mean they have chronic wasting disease necessarily. That's why we need to test them to know. Now, what does a CWD deer actually look like? Well, often, much of the time, a deer infected with chronic wasting disease looks like this. Very healthy, you wouldn't know there's a problem in the world wrong with them. In fact, after being infected with chronic wasting disease, it takes at least 16 months before that deer begins showing clinical signs of infection, namely emaciation, drooling, abnormal behavior. All of those signs that are commonly listed out with chronic wasting disease don't show themselves until that deer's been infected over a year. So this is a really big challenge, of course, with management, because those deer, for those 16 months, are spreading chronic wasting disease to all the other deer. This is one of the biggest challenges, of course, with surveillance, and again, why we must test deer, even if they look healthy, to know if they're infected. The total time that a deer is infected with CWD usually ranges from 16 to 24 months, at which point that deer will die by 24 months of being infected. And like I mentioned before, catching chronic wasting disease is a sure death sentence for any deer. So again, coming back to why this matters for our white-tailed deer here in Yadkin County. First off, CWD is a very permanent disease. Like I mentioned before, once it's introduced into a population, it becomes established, it doesn't go anywhere, it just slowly builds, okay? So making mistakes now or a lack of action now can have long-term consequences for the future that you can't undo. What we know from watching other states is that CWD prevalence will slowly rise. As the video mentioned, CWD is spread by prions. Prions are proteins, and the specific CWD prion is a misfolded protein that causes other prions in the deer's body to misfold. But because prions aren't living material, they don't die. They're not like a virus or bacteria. You can't cure them, you can't kill them, because they are essentially just material. We're all made of proteins, and so there's no way to kill those proteins. So they build up in the environment, and that's why prevalence slowly increases over time. Well, we also know that as more and more of the population is infected with CWD, the average lifespan of those deer will decline, because more and more deer are dying because of CWD. And what we do know is for the future, deer hunting will change. And it's up to us now to adapt to deer hunting and the changes that we expect because of it. Just to make one thing clear before we go any further, we want deer hunting to continue. We want to keep the tradition of deer hunting in northwestern North Carolina like it's always been, and keep hunters in the field and pass on this tradition to future generations. And to do that, it's important that we adapt to the circumstances that we've been given, and that's CWD. All right, so talking a little bit more about the population effects that are often cited when talking about CWD. I wanted to explain this a little bit the best that my mind understands it, and that's talking about fawn recruitment. Hunters in general, we're very tuned into fawn recruitment. We understand that to have a viable huntable population, you have to have reproduction, right? You have to have fawns to replace those deer taken by hunting, taken by car collisions every year. That's how a population remains stable or grows. Across the southeast and across North Carolina, the average fawn recruitment rate is 50%. So what that means is that it takes essentially 2 does to produce 1 fawn every year. Or in other words, it takes 2 years for a doe to replace herself, to have 1 deer left behind her that will go on to live after she expires. With chronic wasting disease, like I mentioned before, the lifespan of those individuals in the population gets shorter and shorter. And of course, as more and more of the population is infected, more and more are dying at a younger age. So what this can mean is that those animals aren't reproducing enough times to replace themselves, and that can cause the population to decline. Now, looking at the North Carolina age distribution, this is just for adult deer in our harvest. You can see these 2 bars that are on the right are for bucks and does that are 3.5 years and older. And remember earlier I mentioned the timeline, 16 to 24 months from time of infection before a deer dies. In states that have had chronic wasting disease for some time now, they're seeing a higher and higher percentage of fawns that they're testing come back positive for CWD. So a fawn that's positive, it's only a couple of months old, it only has 16 to 24 months after being infected before it's going to die from the disease, which doesn't give that much time to successfully reproduce. Of course, that's where the numbers start not adding up. And in the long term, this can drive the population down. So as we're talking about this population effect, I want to make one thing clear. It's not going to happen quickly. CWD prevalence increases very slowly. This year, next year, we're not going to see a bunch of dead deer or lack of deer because of chronic wasting disease. but the disease is in the population and it's spreading. And because we know that, we need to act to try to mitigate that threat. But here's Yadkin County talking about our detection here now, what we know. The deer that was that came back positive for CWD was harvested in mid-December. It was a hunter-harvested buck, estimated at 2.5 years old. Based on the amount of prion buildup in his lymph nodes that multiple labs looked at, confirmed that he was in a later stage of the disease. So what that means is that he'd been infected for at least 14, 16 months when he was harvested. If we run back the clock, right, he was 2.5 years old when he was harvested. That means that he was likely infected with CWD as a yearling buck, right around 1 year old. Understand the ecology of deer, we know that in the southeast and across the Whitetails Range, yearling bucks often disperse from their home range between their fawn year and their yearling year, when they're going to have their first set of antlers. Fawn dispersal is important to gene flow within a population, but of course it can have consequences like this. This deer may have dispersed and brought this disease with him. Now we'll never know for sure if he was born where he was harvested here in northern Yadkin County or if he dispersed here. But understand that deer ecology gives us some clues as wildlife managers to make choices for how we manage the disease. So based on deer ecology work in the southeast, we know that on average, bucks disperse about 5 miles. That's an important number because it's going to come back when we're talking about our management actions. But on average, bucks disperse about 5 miles. So if we're talking about this positive deer here, we're thinking more than likely he came from within 5 miles of where he was harvested. Now, once in a while, bucks will disperse much further, often up to 30 miles, and that's kind of on the long side. And so that's the distance he may have came from, but a little bit less likely. So what do we know about CWD in North Carolina? Well, we know we have 1 positive deer, but there's a lot more that we need to learn. We don't know what the prevalence of the disease is in the local deer herd here. We need to test more to know that. We don't know exactly the spatial extent of CWD infection in the deer population. Again, we need to test more deer to have any confidence in that. Lastly, we don't know how CWD got to Yadkin County. We'll likely never know that. But what we can do is react to the information we do have and do our best to help the disease from not spreading further and to understand where it is. So how do we combat CWD? Well, to first combat any threat, you have to know where it is, right? To do that, we need to test a lot of deer. We need to test a lot of hunter-harvested deer to understand where the disease is in Yadkin County and possibly other surrounding counties. Next, talking about disease spread, the best way to mitigate CWD spread is to not give it a ride. So giving CWD a ride could be through live deer or dead deer. Live deer that are infected and get turned loose, or dead deer, hunter-harvested deer that are infected, moved and discarded on the landscape can take prions with them, and that can cause new outbreaks to start. We want to protect other parts of the state and other states from future and new hotspots. And lastly, we can help to slow the transmission rate of the disease within the population here in the local area by avoiding any unnecessary congregating of deer in the deer herd. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jason Smith, our District 7 biologist.
Good afternoon. I'm Jason Smith, the District 7 biologist, so I'll be the local biologist for this area in Yadkin County. And what I'm going to talk about today is the CWD surveillance areas. I'm going to lay these areas out to you and also discuss how these areas were determined. Okay, to begin with, I want to show you where the harvest location occurred. And we're going to start out at the state level. And the green dot shows the harvest location of northern Yadkin County, which is where the deer was harvested. And this was in District 7, so the northwestern part of North Carolina. And within relation to other states, the harvest location was 20 miles to Patrick County, Virginia, 62 miles to Johnson County, Tennessee, and 82 miles to York County, South Carolina. Now we'll go over some terms here for our CWD surveillance area and give you why each surveillance area is determined based off of the certain mile radius. So the CWD surveillance area is going to be divided into two areas. It's a primary CWD surveillance area, which we'll refer to as the PSA throughout the presentation, and the secondary CWD surveillance area, which will be referred to as the SSA. So the PSA, it is going to be approximately 5-mile radius around the CWD harvest location. And the 5-mile radius is determined, as Mariah had mentioned earlier, about yearling dispersal. It is the average yearling dispersal distance. So that's where the 5 miles radius is determined for the PSA. And the secondary surveillance area is determined, it's going to be between a 5 and 30-mile radius, and this would be the maximum dispersal distance that a yearling buck would travel during dispersal. So to begin with, we had to look at the total area that was going to be in the surveillance area. So we in turn looked at the farthest possible distance that these yearling bucks would disperse. So we're looking at a 30-mile radius around the harvest location. And you can see here that the majority of the surveillance area would be in the eastern part of the District 7. Now, once we take Virginia, because you noticed that from the previous slide that the surveillance area actually encompassed a couple of miles into Virginia. So we omitted the Virginia portion for the surveillance area, or the secondary surveillance area. But then we necked it down. We're going to zoom in closer to the dot in the middle, the smaller radius, and that's going to be the primary surveillance area, which will be the 5-mile radius. And with that, we're going to zoom in even further. And so now you're looking at the southern part of Surry County and the northern part of Yadkin County. And so this would be, on paper, this would be the circle around the harvest location. But of course, for hunters and the public, it's hard to delineate a perfect round circle. So we had to look at land features, roads, and determine a boundary for the primary surveillance area, which is the 5-mile buffer. With that, the round circle turned into roads and rivers as being the main boundary for the primary surveillance area. And I'm going to step over here and sort of highlight the surveillance area with a pointer here. And where I'm going to start is in Boonville, right here. This is the intersection of 601 and 67. And so I'm going to start at the southernmost boundary. So the PSA is going to travel east down 67. And this road here would be Fairground Road. And I'm assuming the locals would be familiar with this, and it'll travel a short distance, where this will be Shady Grove Church Road, just a little short distance here, which runs into Shoals Road, which will travel down toward the state park property and tie into the Yadkin River. And from then, the eastern boundary here will follow the Yadkin River to the intersection of the Ararat River, which will travel north. And then you'll run into Quaker Church Road here, and it'll continue north up to 268. And then from 268, the northernmost boundary will travel west to 601, which will then, you'll travel back south and tie you back into Boonville. And this is lays out the primary surveillance area, which is roughly 51,000 acres. And so now we're zooming back out. We had to do the same for the secondary surveillance area. We had to look at land features, roads, and county boundaries to determine the secondary surveillance area. So when we put that on paper and started mapping it out and finding these features, we come up with county boundaries and roads being the most comparable to the radius around the 30-mile harvest location. And from this, I'm gonna step back over here, and I'm gonna start on the south side again. But right here, I'm gonna start central because this is the Iredell County and Davie County line. So we're gonna start at the Iredell County line, and it'll come down to the Davie County line, which is the South Yadkin River, and then it'll travel the Davie County line to the Yadkin River, which will then follow Forsyth County and travel north all the way to the Virginia line along the Stokes County boundary, and then we'll travel west along the Virginia line, along the Stokes County boundary, Surrey County boundary, and then we'll travel halfway across Allegheny County, and this is 21, which will travel south through Sparta and run into Highway 18, which will follow Highway 18 through Allegheny, through Center Wilkes, and will tie into 115 in Wilkes County, and then it will follow Wilkes County to the Iredell County line, which is 115, and continue cutting through Iredell County, and will tie in 115 and Interstate 40, and it'll follow Interstate 40 over to back to the point of origin here at the Iredell-Davie County line. And so whenever you look at all this, it turns out that it's about 1.7 million acres. So the secondary surveillance area is quite a bit larger, but again, that's the maximum distance that a deer could have possibly dispersed from or to. So with that being said, that is the reasoning and how we have the PSA and SSA, which combined makes up our surveillance area for our, to help determine the prevalence of this disease in the upcoming seasons. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Chris Gray, and is going to speak further about some of the regulations.
All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Chris Gray. Like Jason said, I'm one of the assistant chiefs in the Wildlife Management Division. And like Jason said, this is a presentation I hope I would never have to give. For the last 20 years, I've had the good fortune to work for the Wildlife Commission in a variety of positions. And I've really had the good fortune for the vast majority of that time to be right here in District 7. I know you guys have got a lot of questions about CWD, what's going to mean for you in the coming future, and I'll just mention that to say that I'm right there with you. I have a lot of those same questions, a lot of those same concerns about that, what it means for us deer hunting here in this area. My job tonight for the next 10 or 15 minutes is to go over some of the regulations and try to tie it together with what Jason's telling you about distances and those surveillance zones, and what Mariah started off telling us about the biology of chronic wasting disease. Try to tie it all together here. And there's 4 very broad categories that I'm going to cover. Talk about fawn rehabilitation, what it means for that. We want to talk in a bit more detail about what it means for baiting and feeding. I want to talk specifically about CWD testing, what that means when we say testing. I'm going to talk about carcass transportation. And I'm going to make a point here also, there is not a 5th item on there, which there seems to be sort of some public concern about based on things that other states have done in years past. There is an advantage to being the 29th state, and that is that we have 28 examples to go on. in how we go forward. And one of those early attempts in some of the other states was to try to eradicate the deer herd, knock the density way, way down, go down to zero, basically wipe the disease out in that fashion, and that worked horribly in some of those other states. That's not on my list today because that's not a path we're trying to go down. And I'm glad to be able to say that. So we'll start first with fawn rehabilitation. We've had a wonderful network of dedicated folks for many, many years that have really put their heart and soul into rehabilitating fawns all across North Carolina. One of the unfortunate realities of chronic wasting disease is that moving those live deer around at this point creates a lot of risk. So the regulations that you're going to see going into effect is going to prohibit fawn rehabilitation within that broad surveillance area that Jason just showed you. And along with that would be that fawns that originate from within that broad surveillance area would not be allowed to taken out of that area to a rehabilitator in other parts of the state. That's an unfortunate reality of CWD, but to kind of bring it back to what Mariah told you earlier, one of the worst things we could do is to give it a ride. Jason showed you that surveillance area a minute ago, and what he showed you was a map that affects some or all of 8 different counties in the state. I'm going to put a little bit of a positive spin on that and remind folks that that means that at this time there are 92 counties that are not being affected by those specific CWD regulations. We would love to keep that number at 92. We'd love to keep it as tight as we can. So not giving it a ride is an important part of that. When we talk about baiting and feeding and unnecessarily congregating deer, there's some details here in what you'll see in the regulations. And specifically, it says that the placement of bait, food products, minerals, or salt licks would be to purposefully concentrate wildlife. It would be prohibited from January 2nd through the end of August each year. So that's basically saying that would be prohibited outside of the hunting season. There would be a few exceptions in there. So bird feeders would be accepted. A city that would be participating like Elkin would be participating with the urban archery season. Hunters would be able to use bait in those situations. And then if there are other activities that are specifically permitted by the commission, not just saying allowed, but specifically have a permit through the permitting process, those activities could continue. A great example of that would be some of the work that USDA does in trying to eradicate problematic feral hogs from parts of the surveillance area. That's a permitted activity. It goes through the permitting process with the commission, and that activity would be allowed to continue to trap those hogs. So during the hunting season, though, hunters could use bait on the landscape. It seems a little funny that we do it like that, perhaps, but concentrating those deer at that time does serve 2 very important purposes. One, we need to help hunters in this area to continue surveillance, to continue to find out more specifically where this disease is occurring and how common it is, how prevalent it is. And so allowing hunters to continue to use bait for the time being, to assist with that is a good choice. And it also serves, as Director Ingram mentioned earlier, we want our hunting traditions to continue as much as possible here in North Carolina. Not everybody uses bait, but a lot of hunters do. That's the way they get satisfaction from hunting. So for the time being, that may change in future years, but for the time being, that's the way it will be put into place. And that sort of brings it back to what Mariah was telling you earlier about slowing transmission rates. We can't stop that completely. Deer are social animals. But if we have the opportunity to slow that down some at a time when that bait is unnecessary on the landscape, that's a really good step. All right, I told you we wanted to talk some about CWD testing. And we still are very much in a surveillance phase. We're not in a management phase. That will come sometime in the future. But right now, testing is very, very important, as Mariah's mentioned. So in some places and times, testing will be mandatory. So the primary surveillance area, so that tight 5-mile core area that Jason showed you a few minutes ago, a hunter that kills a deer in those areas, it would be mandatory for that deer to be tested for CWD during the entire black powder, 2 weeks of black powder season, and the entire general gun season. Within the secondary surveillance area, that larger zone from 5 miles out to 30 miles, that would be mandatory testing during the 2 weeks of black powder season and the first week of the regular gun season. That's going to give us the opportunity to look at a lot of deer, test for CWD. At other places and times, it is entirely voluntary, but we strongly encourage hunters to submit samples anywhere in the state and during bow season and other times of the year here in the surveillance area. And that's coming back to Mariah's point that, he showed you to start with. One of the key things in dealing with CWD is just flat out knowing where it is and how common it is. And testing lots and lots of deer is going to be an important part of that. So what does the sample look like? How do we get a sample? We don't need the entire deer. There's different options for doing that. But in a short description here, what we need are the retropharyngeal lymph nodes. That retropharyngeal simply meaning behind the windpipe. Those are located under the deer's jaw. We can get that. If you got the whole deer there, you can certainly get it. We can get it from just having a few inches of neck and the head. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And the tissues, those lymph nodes themselves are very small. Those collection jars you see in that bottom picture, it's a very small piece of tissue that the commission needs. So the remainder of that deer, all the trophy parts, all the edible parts, those can certainly stay with the hunter. You don't have to give us the entire deer or anything like that. And there's various ways that hunters can assist with testing and comply with that mandatory rule. So within the surveillance area during those peak times, we anticipate having quite a few staffed check stations. You think back, we haven't had those in a number of years since we've gone to internet and telephone reporting, but back in the old days of deer check stations, that was a very common thing. Simply bring the deer by that check station, our staff will be there to get the sample and have that deer tested. We also have a network shown in the video there. We have a network of freezers situated around the state and within the surveillance area where a hunter can simply drop off the head, a little bit of neck, fill out a card, we can take it from there. That's a great way to do it as well. And then we also would have a third option here. We have a network of Cervid Health cooperators within the surveillance area and around the state. Those folks are taxidermists and processors that have been trained up in how to collect those samples, and they have the option of doing that for their customers to assist us as well. That's a great partnership with those cooperators. So there's two really important things to all this testing. One, I've been hammering on a little bit, which is understand the prevalence of the disease. The other side of that is that you folks as deer hunters want to know whether the deer you just took is sick with CWD, because you don't know by simply looking at it if it's in those early stages. It is our intention, as we have always done, to be able to provide those test results back to the hunter. In years prior to this, that's been on a fairly long schedule of several months because we were in more of a surveillance mode, just simply looking for it. So there wasn't a real time crunch to get those results back quick. We're in a different ballpark now. We're in a different ballgame now. We know folks need and want to have those results as soon as possible. I can't really tell you tonight what as soon as possible means, other than to say we want that to be very, very quick, and we're working hard to put things in place to do that. Last area I wanted to update you all on is carcass transportation, and this all comes back to Mariah's talk about don't give it a ride. You can give it a ride through a live deer. You can also, in a bad way, you can give it a ride with a carcass or carcass parts. So that's what the carcass transportation stuff is all about. When we look to those surveillance areas that Jason described to you a minute ago, we talk about that core area that's bound in red there in the middle, that primary surveillance area, the 5-mile zone. Basically, the rules say no deer or deer carcass or carcass parts can come out of that primary surveillance area except for that short list there. The boned out meat, caped hides, antlers, clean skulls, clean teeth, taxidermy type products. That rule should look kind of familiar to most deer hunters because that's been the requirement for folks that have hunted out of state for a number of years. If you've gone to Virginia, if you've gone to South Carolina, if you've gone to Tennessee, if you've gone to other states in recent years, that was the requirement for what you could bring back into North Carolina from another state. So at this time, that basically applies that same rule to our primary and secondary surveillance areas. There is an exception in the rule that's written for the primary surveillance area, and that's listed there at the bottom of your screen. And that basically says those folks that are hunting in that primary surveillance area, that are using one of the Service Health Cooperators, that is a taxidermist or a meat processor that's right there in Surrey County, they've got the option of double bagging those parts and taking it to those Service Health Cooperators directly, because those folks are going to be able to dispose of it properly. And sort of the reverse of that is true for the secondary surveillance area. It's the same restrictions on, any deer or deer park that originates from within that secondary surveillance area needs to stay there within that zone. So no exceptions on that. So what kind of options does a hunter have? Several options, really. One of the good things about this part of the state is folks are very connected to the land, very connected to hunting on the land or family land, those type of things. So oftentimes they have the option right there, they're processing deer on that property where the deer was living, where the deer was taking. And if that carcass can be kept right there on the property, boned out, and the bones and tissues and blood can stay there and be buried on that property, that's the ideal scenario. And that's certainly an option for lots and lots of hunters, and that's a good option for disease management. Some other options would be taking those parts to a landfill. There's a variety of options within that surveillance area depending on which county you're in. And then right there in that primary surveillance zone, the commission intends to make some lined dumpsters available for folks that are right there in that primary zone that might not have a good option. We want to help make it easy for folks to do the right thing with those carcass parts. And the worst thing we could do with them would be to take them outside the surveillance area and bring CWD to one of those other 92 counties that right now are not being affected by it. That's really important. So with that, that's the last slide I had. I'm going to look at Brad Howard, our division chief, just a minute. Was there anything I forgot, Brad, or anything you want me to add?
No, I think not. I think we'll run it.
I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you.
See if I can make this.
Yes, sir.
This works. Or actually, you can take that one, take it with you. So you can bring the lights up, I think. I don't know. There we go. It took Captain to figure it out. Good job there, Jeremy.
So this part,
We're going to move into some of the questions. I know, hopefully, we had the portal open for about 2 weeks. Close to that now? Must be. Portal open for about 2 weeks to get questions online. So we hope that the presentations themselves answered a lot of questions. And I'm going to go through some of the ones that we received online. I know you guys and everybody has written down some. Like this way? Oh, it's that's picking it up. Got it. Sorry. Got it. So hopefully we've answered a lot. I'll go through some of these. We've got some new ones. If now after seeing all the presentations, anybody's got a question that popped up through the presentation, you can write it down on a single card and hold it up. Somebody will come get it. But I'm checking the boxes on some of these because I know that we touched on them. So I hope that we answered some of these questions. I think Chris did a really good job. One of the first ones we kept getting on and on was, are we going to kill all the deer? And the answer to that is no, that's not our management strategy. That's not our surveillance strategy. We're going to work cooperatively with deer hunters to surveil for this disease and try to find out where it's at. But I think Chris covered that pretty well. We've got the luxury of looking back through time at things that didn't pan out well with other states. We are initially starting here. We want to find out a couple of things, as Mariah and Chris both touched on. We want to know where it's at and how bad is it. So that's our mechanism to start with, and that's getting these deer tested, hunting normally during the hunting season like we do. We may ask you if you shoot a couple of deer every year, maybe shoot 3 this year for us. Shoot a few extra. Get us those tests for the first couple of years. Let's see where this thing is, because we need to find it on the landscape, and we need to know how prevalent it is out there. And then we'll transition into the management phase. So I'm trying to think of some of the good questions that we didn't touch on. Chris touched on the baiting and feeding restrictions and the whys and the approach the commission has decided to take towards those things. I would suggest a couple of things. Anytime we can avoid unnecessarily congregating deer, especially in this area, that's most definitively what we should do. I was asked, one of the questions was, what about mineral licks? Mineral licks, of course, no longer can be placed on the landscape outside of the season. What do we do about the ones that are already there? Well, I mean, they're there. The minerals are in the ground. So unless you got a backhoe and you want to go dig all the dirt up and haul it off, which would be fine. That would be a good thing for CWD management, but that's a lot of work. So I think we just need to work on getting that off the landscape, okay, y'all? I can't think of a better way to spread these prions around than putting stuff in the dirt that we ask deer to come and lick, and then we encourage other deer to come and lick it as well. You saw how Mariah talked about the transmissions of the prions, so that's a good way to ensure that deer are licking where other deer have licked. So, but we can't do anything about what's on the landscape. I mean, you can't get that out, and you can't kill the prions that are there. So they are there, if they're there. We hope they're not that far away. So I hope that addresses those questions. During the surveillance period, we're going to work towards, trying to make sure we can take deer and deer hunt. And there's another card behind you.
We're supposed to be hauling it off too. I mean, I don't understand.
Well, hang on, I'll get to it. What's the question? Did you write it down?
You said haul off the dirt, okay? But where do you haul it?
The only thing you can take that would be to a landfill, and put it in a sealed landfill. That's the only way you can get rid of it. I was saying basically that's not a problem. That's not a really a logical thing that we can do. That's where you would have to take. You'd have to take that dirt and put it in a sealed landfill to keep the prions out of it. That's the only way to do it. Because there's no other way to do it. You can't burn it. You can't do anything like that. It won't kill it. So that's the only way you can do that. So that's what I was basically saying. It's almost illogical for us to even try to do that. So. Is there any questions over there, Kyle, that's coming in you want to look at? Let's see. Food plots. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, can we plant food plots? Yeah, currently food plots, planting of food plots are not prohibited or anything like that. I mean, there's cornfields in the primary zone, there's wheat fields in the primary zone, and food plots are not restricted by the baiting and feeding rules whatsoever. You got anything to add to that, Mariah? Maybe on food plots? I mean, that's the general, as far as regulation goes, they're not restricted, so that you can continue with your food plot practices just like you have been. Let's see, I'm going to transition and move around with these. There were a couple of questions that dealt with, one of the more common questions we got, and I don't know if there's anybody in here that had it or not, and I'm going to drift over here for Sarah and Dr. Harris's. One of the questions was about pets, and could my dog get sick from eating an infected deer and that kind of thing. And then there were a couple of questions about eating livestock and one question about research. So I'm going to start with the livestock question, Dr. Harris. If you'll introduce yourself so they know who you are and talk about the threat to livestock.
Hey there, I'm Catherine Harris with the North Carolina Department of Agriculture. I'm the Director of Livestock Programs. And so typically these transmissible prions do not cross species. Even within cervids, there are non-susceptible species of cervid. So it's very unlikely that it would cross from cervid into our domesticated livestock species.
How about pets? You want to talk about the canines?
My name is Aaron Laux. I'm the Farm Cervid Program Coordinator through the Department of Ag. At this time, there isn't any evidence of any prion disease being expressed in canine populations that's domestic or wild. It's kind of a special thing with canines. So I hope that answers your question.
So that's good. And we had a couple of questions. There was a question that just came in about rapid testing, developing a rapid test, and there was also a question that we had submitted online about, is anybody doing research to try to develop a vaccine or a cure? So I'm going to let Sarah answer those questions. You can introduce yourself.
Sarah Vandenberg, Wildlife Health Biologist with the Wildlife Commission. So I think I'll start with that, a rapid test being developed. So the question was, are rapid tests being developed? If so, how does the public receive the test and at whose expense? At this time, The only testing that is done is through laboratory means, through either a test called ELISA or what we utilize with our commission, which is immunohistochemistry. So that's where these guys come in, these are the lymph nodes. They're sent to a lab, they're processed into slides, and they're looked at by a pathologist. And that's the only way at this point that we can have a more reasonable, positive or not detected answer. There is not yet a field test that can be done by a hunter. That is the hope that that will happen someday, but we're not there yet. And then the question we got from online, which is anyone researching a vaccine or cure? The answer to that is yes. This disease has been on the landscape in wild deer since the 1980s, and it's been known about in Colorado since 1967 is when it was first ID'd. So while it's brand new to us in North Carolina, it's not brand new. It's still a young disease as far as diseases are concerned. This isn't something that's been around for hundreds and thousands of years. But there's been some research in some times. The University of Calgary has been working on a vaccine for a while now. It doesn't work in the way that most people think of a vaccine. It's not just a single shot and then they're immune. So how this vaccine has been working is it's 8 to 9 oral doses as a prototype. This isn't something that's being done yet on the large scale. So it takes 8 to 9 oral doses, and what has been developed so far is basically a delay in the onset of the disease. It doesn't stop the deer from dying ultimately, it just delays it. And so this may be something in the future, if that research continues, that may be applicable for captive service. This isn't something that's going to be something we can put out in the field for wild deer. It's unfortunately not usable for our wild deer population.
Could be.
Yeah, maybe, someday. We keep researching it. That's the goal.
You make it, we'll feed it.
Thanks, sir. Well, I'll never say never, but a couple of questions that we got handed in. Mariah's got one that I want to pass. Are the prions safe in any method of preparation? I'm assuming that's in reference to eating the meat. You can't kill the prions in the meat by cooking it to any degree. CDC recommends not eating deer meat from a deer that tests positive. There's no known transfer of this disease to humans, but they recommend that you not eat a deer that tests positive, and cooking it does not kill the prions. So there's no preparation method that will get rid of those. He needs a card. And the reason I'm having to do cards is because I need these people to be able to hear our questions, okay? This is a question about carcass transportation. In the secondary area, do you need to debone the meat before taking it into a meat processor in the same area? No, if the meat processor is in the secondary area, you can stay within that area. You don't have to debone the meat to take it to a processor inside the zone. So you're okay as far as that goes. You just can't take it to a processor outside the zone without deboning your meat and leaving all the rest of those parts inside. Mariah, you want to handle that question that I handed you? You have to read it so they know.
Hear me? So the question here is in reference to baiting and feeding. And question reads, how many states that allowed baiting and feeding prior to detecting CWD continued allowing it afterward? Off the top of my head, I'm not going to reference a number, but Arkansas is a good example. All right, so Arkansas is a good example of a state that's kind of gone before us in many different ways. They detected CWD several years ago, and they have implemented many regulations across the state to combat it in different areas where they're picking up the disease. And Arkansas has found great success in maintaining the level of hunter harvest that they need for testing and for managing the population by retaining baiting during the feeding or during the hunting season only, while restricting feeding outside. So there's precedent for it there in Arkansas. And of course, we've consulted with Arkansas staff in the past on CWD, and so there's that question. I have a few others. Go ahead. This one, of course, I'm sure a lot of us are wondering, and that is the origin of CWD. Where did it come from? I touched on it a little bit earlier that it's a protein. It's a misfolded protein. And quite honestly, there is no clear answer to where CWD came from. It was first detected in 1967 out west and slowly picked up in wild herds surrounding there, and future outbreaks in later years farther from those original hot spots were traced back through captive deer movements to that exact location and other deer movements. The point is, there was a clear location where it was first detected, and the first detections outside of that, there was a clear route from which it came from that area of Colorado. So there's no clear answer on exactly how it came to be. I have another one here. What should you do if you see a deer CWD? Should it be put down immediately? So first off, there's really no way of looking at a deer and knowing it has chronic wasting disease. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of deer with CWD will look healthy, and just because a deer looks sick doesn't mean it has CWD. So our guidance would not be to put down a deer immediately just because it might be acting sick. We have a wildlife helpline. We encourage any calls about sick deer to go there, and we refer them to the right person, whether it's law enforcement or district biologist, to respond to that deer depending on the signs. So usually we put you in contact directly with the biologist that can assess all of the signs that the deer is presenting and assess whether or not that deer might have a condition that would warrant being put down. I have another one here. What is the projected percentage increase of infection rate per year in the local and state deer population? I wanted to touch on this one because we talked about earlier, prevalence increases very slowly, but it's important to remember, or to note, it's not a linear increase. So in other words, say for instance, the prevalence was increasing 1% per year right now, in the future it would be increasing more quickly. It's called an exponential growth rate. So it starts out real slow and it gains momentum. And this is already playing out in some other states. And the longer you have the disease, the more quickly it's rising in the population. And that's because, as I mentioned earlier, you have a lot of environmental contamination, and the more and more prions that are out on the landscape from sick deer over generations and generations means more and more deer are becoming infected every year.
Thanks, Brian. I got a couple more here in my hand, and I'll circle back around. Do you have to test every deer you kill? Well, you have to test every deer you kill if you kill it inside that little area in the PSA during the black powder and the firearm season. We will make testing available through the entire hunting seasons, through the freezer drop-offs and those kind of things. You have to test every deer you kill in the bigger area for the 2 weeks of black powder and the first week of gun season. After that, all the testing is voluntary. We will encourage you to continue to test the deer for you to know, and the more samples we get, the better chance we got at finding it if it's out there. But the mandatory component is just during those times. And this rolls into this question, which is why are deer not mandatory testing during archery? It's simply a volume thing. If we have mandatory testing out there, we feel like we need to have staff out there, we need to have folks interacting with you guys, working, being at a place where you can come. The volume, we just don't kill as many deer during the archery season, it's not as fast. And so what we're instructing, hoping the archery hunters will do is use the deer herd cooperators, the processors. If you kill a nice buck, take it and going to take it to a taxidermist, take it to one of the cooperating taxidermists, they'll pull the samples for you, or use the freezer drop stations during the archery season. So that's what we're hoping to do. And so we encourage everybody to test, as many samples as you can submit, the better, but we're only going to try to get our quota samples during those high volume days when we know we got lots of deer. You guys hunt up here. You know we kill a lot of deer during the 2 weeks of black powder and the first week of gun. So that's going to get us a lot. Your question, sir, was, and this is a good question, and it's just, and the answer is what it is, and it's just one of the things that CWD does to us. But I got an answer for you. His question was, he doesn't dress his deer, he doesn't gut before he takes it straight to the processor, and the concern is, well, now I'm going to pay a processor to process my meat, and then what if it comes back positive and I can't eat it? Now I done paid for a deer that I can't eat. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Now, I will give you this little piece of, at least for now, where we are now, we don't feel like the prevalence rate is very high, so odds are your deer is going to come back not detected. You know, that's, you know, so I think, you know, we want them all to test, and one of them, someone might come back tested, but yeah, that's, you know, I don't have a really good answer other than, yeah, I mean, that's one of the deals, you know, one of the options to do that is to debone the meat, you know, debone the meat, take it, you know, and get it tested, put it in the freezer, and then process it later. But that's just one of the sticking points that we can't get around. Another question? Because we can only get the test back so fast. I mean, that's really if we could get if the test was fast enough that we could just hang them in the cooler and hold them until we get the test back, but we're not there yet.
I know a lot of processors, they won't accept it unless it's the whole deal.
Yeah, and they can do their thing, and then, you know, then what you do is just freeze the meat until you get test results back. That's what folks do when they go out west, and then that's what they do in the other states, and now that's what we're gonna have to do in these zones.
Hey, Brad, take 2 steps back.
Yeah, stay back
There you
Stay right here. Oh, okay. This one's for you. I'll let you answer this one, Ryan. Doe, transmittal to phones.
Okay, so the question is there transmission directly from a doe to fawn in utero? So in the womb, and yes, that has been confirmed. So one thing to note there, so in the instance being you have a positive doe, she gives birth to a fawn, that fawn is born with CWD. As I mentioned earlier, the concern there is in the long run, when you have fawns being born with CWD, they're not going to live longer than 2 years maximum, because that disease is already progressing in them. Even a fawn born into a doe group where there's positive does, they're going to come in contact with those other deer in the first year. Of course, it's real common to have maternal groups. You have a couple adult does and some doe fawns from last year and all. If there's a positive doe within that group, any fawns born will likely come into contact with those other does that are positive and transmit the disease there. So there's definitely a risk directly from doe to fawn, and then also from doe to any other fawns born in the immediate vicinity.
All right, Sarah's got a question about testing that she's going to answer.
So the question is, how long will it take to get a positive, or it says negative, but we use the terminology not detected result after submission for testing? So what I can tell you is, historically, that would be about 1 to 3 months. That is coming from a place where we were not a positive state, and so we were testing in a way that was most efficient for our staff. Right, we had fewer staff doing this, and so being able to collect samples for a couple of weeks and then box them all up and send them out together. So what we're doing now is we're working cooperatively with the North Carolina Department of Agriculture. Just opened a brand new research facility in Raleigh. In that research facility is a CWD lab, and we're hoping to work with them to help speed up some of that testing, because our priorities have changed. We want to get sample results back to hunters as soon as we can, and so that timeline, we're not sure exactly what it will be yet, but if historically we're at 1 to 3 months, we're looking to go somewhat quicker than that now.
Just to add on to that, a big component of being able to increase testing at the Rollins Lab in Raleigh will be funding from the state legislature.
So our commitment is to do this as fast as we can, but we can only do it as fast as we can. So a couple of questions we had here. Where are the freezers located in the SSA? We have an interactive map. It's not up right now because the freezers aren't out. We have an interactive map on our webpage that you go to and you can look and you can see all the freezer locations. And we're going to be adding significant numbers of freezer locations across the whole area this year. We had, I don't remember, Jason, hold up your hand. How many did we have last year?
3.
We had 3 last year, but Jason was running all over the place working with taxidermists and meat processors and getting all kinds of stuff. We sampled several thousand deer in this area. But we're going to have a lot more this year because we're going to be open for archery hunting. But as we get closer to hunting season, you'll be able to go onto the website, go to ncwildlife.org/CWD. There's all kind of good information there, and the freezer location map will be able to, you'll be able to click it. You can see where they are. There's little dots on the map, and you can figure out where they're at. And there'll be a lot more of them, so. All right, panel, pay attention for a second, because this is a panel question. I mean, it's a legit question, so would anyone on the panel eat a deer killed in the PSA that was not tested? If you would eat a deer killed in the PSA that was not tested, raise your hand. There you go. Get the deer tested in the PSA, please. Let's see. Chris, you got a couple you want to take? Yeah.
Thank you. I've kind of got a handful here. I'll go through them best I can. So one question was sort of a follow-up on if I kill a deer in the primary surveillance area, can I take it to the secondary surveillance area for processing? And there is a yes exception with that. That would be the yes exception would be if those parts were double bagged. You could take it to one of those Servit Health Cooperators that was a taxidermist or processor within the secondary surveillance area. Within Surrey and Yadkin counties, yes. Right, only within Surrey and Yadkin. We've got a series of questions here. One is about what's our act to prevent the spread, and that really gets at limiting feeding and baiting at times of the year to try to slow down the natural transmission rate. And then also those steps that we put in place to not give it a ride by moving live deer or moving carcass parts. That does line up. The next question is about how does that line up with what other states are doing. That's some of the better learning examples from other states. Like I mentioned before, we have 28 examples to go by. There's a question here about what test sample numbers are we looking for. We'd like to really check as many 100-killed deer as we can. We would love to get 1,500 deer checked within that PSA. That's probably beyond our reach. We would love to get 2,500 deer checked within the surveillance area as a whole. I don't know if we'll get that many or not. We'd love to. And if we got 10 or 12,000 samples from across the entire state, we would be very happy with that. We're budgeting and trying to set up things to get really high numbers of samples. There's a question there that's already been answered about return time on testing. Would there be drop-off stations within the primary surveillance area? Yes, absolutely. We would have some of those freezers within that primary zone. And a question about can it be spread by flies or ticks? And no, that's not how the disease moves around. We had a series of questions about fawn rehabilitation. I'll touch on a couple of those that are fairly general. Some questions about do fawn rehabilitators have an obligation to have fawns tested? No, not a legal obligation necessarily, but if they were willing to cooperate with us, that could be additional information. Best way for those rehabilitators to understand where the surveillance areas are, the maps that Jason went over and that I had briefly in my presentation, those are on our website. Everything we know and are putting into place is very much on our website. We've got a great communications team. That's the best place to get the most up-to-date information about exactly where those surveillance areas are. That's the best place to get it. Is any scientific evidence that a doe who tests positive would have a fawn that would have it? And the answer to that is yes. There's some question as to whether they get it in utero, basically at the moment of birth. But even if they didn't, they are in very, very close proximity to that doe. They're nursing on that doe. So yes, they're pretty much going to get it if their mother had it. And I'll say this, there's several other questions on their fawn rehab that are very specific. And I think most all of our staff, I'll look at our Director Ingram just a little bit. If there's really detailed questions, we're going to be here for a bit after this is over. Some of those are probably handled better one-on-one. We'd be glad to talk to whomever that was with those very specific questions. That's several that I have was holding on to, Brad.
All right, I got one real quick, easy one. How many positive tests so far? One. The one right here in Yadkin, that's the only one.
Say how many of that we tested. So
Out of 7,600 is something, or 70, what was it, Sarah? 7,200? Over 7,000. Over 7,000 deer tested this year. We hit the one positive in Yadkin County. Now, if we're lucky, that means our prevalence rate is really, really low. So that's what we're looking for in the next couple of years. Jason's got a couple of questions that some folks had about the ongoing testing, so that leads right into that.
Yeah, I've got a question here. I'm gonna start off with depredation permits. We got a question, are you testing deer under depredation permits? And that is, yes, we are. It's actually required if you're get a depredation permit in the surveillance area, as well as Guilford and Rockingham County. You are required to submit a head killed under a depredation permit for testing. And the next question here is concerning roadkill, and do we test roadkill in particular PSA areas? But yes, we do. Of course, we can't get every roadkill, but we do test roadkill. A lot of those are often the damage from vehicles aren't suitable for testing, but we do try to test all those roadkill that we can and work through DOT on getting those samples as well.
So here's a couple, you got any more over there? I got a couple right here. I think that this is, will cremation kill prions? Well, so incineration, I think, is what we're talking about potentially. Yeah, if the incinerators get to enough heat, they will kill them. We actually are purchasing a mobile incinerator that we will have up here. We'll have it in the PSA zone. We're going to use that primarily. We assume that deer heads are coming to us. We're going to be pulling the samples. We're going to try to use that mobile incinerator to get rid of that part of the carcasses, but it will do it. It will. Am I on the mark or not? Sorry, I moved around too much. I'm sorry. So this is a good question. I mean, it really is a good question, and it's should we be concerned with meat from past seasons' harvest, since we don't know the prevalence? I think the concern is, given what we know, we found one positive. It's highly unlikely that you would be eating the meat from a CWD positive deer from previous years. But the truth be told, I can't tell you whether you were or weren't. And that's what you do with that meat is going to have to be a personal choice. But given what we know right now, we've got one positive. It's pretty unlikely that you've got the other positive in your freezer right now that you killed a year ago or whatever. Or this past season. But I can't give you the definitive answer on that one. But I don't think I'd throw my meat away. Questions over here?
I have a couple of questions, two that are in the same vein, and one that's a little different. Start with the different one first. The question was, how many tests are currently pending? We have no outstanding tests at the lab at this time, so that would account for the hunting season. We are, as Jason mentioned, we collect roadkills, we collect depredation permits. That's an ongoing process, and so from now until June 30th, and then we restart it all again July 1. So the sampling for us in some ways never ends. But the bulk of the hunting season, all of the hunting season from deer, those samples we have gotten back. The other two questions are more about actually the samples themselves. One is there a time limit from time of kill to the time of taking the sample? The answer to that is yes. The time varies, and it varies because of temperature more than anything else. So it would be ideal if we could get that deer to us or a sampling facility within 24 hours. That'll give us the best chance of having a sample that can be tested. When it goes longer than that, think about deer that are hit by a car on the side of the road. They get kind of gross kind of quick. Well, the grosser that deer is, the harder that's going to be to test. So the cells themselves start to liquefy, and at that point, we're not able to do the testing. And in similar fashion, I guess, are we able to sanitize trucks that are hauling deer? And similarly, what about knives or other tools being used? Not easily, but yes, in a way. So your truck is going to be the most difficult. So I would suggest having either a container in your truck that you put your deer in, or double bagging your deer before you throw it in the bed of your truck. That will give you the most barrier between that animal that you're unsure of the testing status of and the truck that you're holding your groceries in or whatever. When it comes to things like your knives, you kind of have two options. You can use a knife with replaceable blades. That will help. You can use a clean blade with each animal. If you have a more of a fixed blade knife or a non-replaceable blade, if you use soap and water and clean all of the debris off of it, and then soak it in bleach, 50% bleach for an hour, you should be pretty good to go at that point. It's a long time and it's a high amount of bleach, but that's kind of where the research is leading us. This is a very difficult protein to get rid of, but that has shown to be helpful and to reduce the seeding, so the ability for the proteins to make new prions, new proteins that we don't want.
No, you're fine. Questions out there, Chris?
We got another one here related to deer management. Will deer limits be raised or reduced due to this disease? And the simple answer is no. As of right now, there's no changes to deer bag limits or the season structure. And that's just another point to reiterate. We want to keep deer hunting the way it is. We want hunters out there taking deer. We are not trying to eradicate deer. We want deer here for future generations, and we want hunters here hunting deer.
Okay, we've got 2 questions here. I'll start on a little bit, then I'm going to ask Brad to jump in. So one question is about why are we not getting every carcass off the landscape? And the comment along with it there is that current studies are showing that plants can uptake that prion, that misfolded prion. It's a great point. I think if we had a feasible way to get every carcass off the landscape, that might be something worth considering. But kind of backing up what Mariah was saying, we're not trying to totally eradicate the herd and eliminate deer from Yadkin or Surrey counties. It would be good if every single dead deer carcass could be obtained, but it's just not realistic to do that. The other question I had here was, what's the projected amount of time that surveillance will last? And I think what the question is getting at is how long will we be kind of in this mode of really trying to sample and understand what's going on. I'm gonna look at Brad a little bit while I answer, but I suspect a year from now we'll know a lot more, but I suspect it will take us a couple seasons of intensive sampling. Hopefully we find it's at low prevalence. And when it is at low prevalence, it takes a while to be confident about that. So I suspect we're probably looking at high surveillance for several years. I'm kind of see Brad wants to.
Yeah, I would definitely that. I'll talk to Mariah's answer first. That's exactly right. But eventually, this plays together nicely. Eventually, we're going to move into a management stage of CWD, and we're working already trying to determine what our deer management philosophy in CWD positive counties. How are we going to work that? What's it going to look like? We're going to continue to work with you guys. So there may be eventually some opportunities for increased harvest in certain spots, allowing certain hunters who want to take more deer versus hunters who only want one. So we're going to work through all those options as we move. As to the surveillance, I think Chris is spot on. I think we're going to know a little bit more next year. We're going to keep going. We've told you we had the hindsight of looking back through all the other states that have had it, and I've had multiple conversations with multiple wildlife chiefs across, especially the southeast, who have CWD, who have been battling it, who have just gotten it. The one recommendation that they've given to me, and I'll pass it along to you guys because it applies to you guys too, is this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. We're not going to know where we're at in a year or two. We may not know where we're at for 3 or 4 years. But we're going to work together to figure out what the picture looks like in North Carolina, in Yadkin and Surrey County and the surrounding counties. So it's going to be a process, and we're just going to keep plugging away at it and learning what we know. And every year we're going to learn a little bit more. So that's the approach. So here's a good question. I should give this one to Steve. Why didn't you give this to me? You said what I was saying. He gave it to you. If you see a sick deer, do you shoot it? If it's CWD positive, do you get a replacement tag? Well, so in general, the answer to that is if you shoot a deer during the hunting season, no, you don't get a replacement tag. If you'll remember back quickly to what Mariah told you, you're not going to probably know that you just shot a CWD positive deer, for one thing. So you're not going to know that you shot a CWD positive deer. And giving our current predictions on the testing thing, you're probably not going to get your results back before the season's out. So, but in general, the answer is no. If you do see a physically sick deer, in the world of cell phones, make a phone call, even if you're sitting in your tree stand. And, you know, we can direct you to a law enforcement officer, one of our staff biologists. You can describe the deer. You know, we can make arrangements to follow up on a visibly sick deer. But no, that's the standard answer. You've never answered that one before, have you, Director Ingram? Anything over there? Got one here? Got a ponder on that one for a second?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a good one here about what's the likelihood that the current standards and/or regulations regarding CWD will change. I'd say it's quite likely that those would change as we learn more. We may get CWD positive animals, you know, that are not in the exact same location, so our maps may have to change somewhat. That would be one outcome. Another outcome or another change might be sort of what Brad was touching on earlier, that right now we're very intensively in a surveillance phase to figure out where we are. Once we kind of get out of that surveillance phase, we'll be in more of a CWD management phase, and it might look somewhat different. So the follow-up question there is, if they do change, will there be another meeting or other form of notifying the public? Yes, absolutely. I don't look for those to change in the immediate future. I'm talking a little bit down the road, but certainly there would be additional public meetings on our website, news release, lots of outreach to make folks aware of what's going on. And sort of follow up on that throughout the entire process, will there be updates to the current status, and how will these updates be delivered to the public? It likely would be a rapidly changing situation as we get more test results and understand better what's going on. I would say look a little bit to Mindy's over there somewhere. I think that she and Fairley and some of our communication staff have done a wonderful job with the CWD section of our website. I would say if you're interested in the most up-to-date information we can give you on information, surveillance area maps, and those kind of things, it's going to be right there on the website.
Yeah, and I'll comment on that as well. One of the biggest things in us managing CWD in the state of North Carolina is communicating with our constituent base. And that is a priority for us. And with the Wildlife Commission, we will, as we're doing today in this first public forum, we will continue to communicate with you in person and give you updates, go into the communities. This will not be the only public forum that we have. We will come out to our communities, to our hunters, and educate them, because we need you to help us control chronic wasting disease. Our communication staff, as Chris has just mentioned, will be posting, updating our posts on our website and using our social media outlets and our email groups to communicate with you, to get you up-to-date information at its best. Thank you.
All right, so we have a couple here about venison and consuming meat from a deer. The first one is, are there any physical signs that the meat is infected, especially in the early stages of the disease? And the simple answer is absolutely no. There's no way of knowing by looking at the meat. Even in the latest clinical stages, the meat of a deer would not look any different. That's why you have to get lymph nodes tested to be able to know if that deer is infected. Adding to that, can you cook out the disease? And this is touching back on something Brad mentioned, incineration. You don't want to incinerate a steak before you eat it. At least I don't. I like mine rare. And if you incinerate it enough to kill the prions, there would be nothing left. So the simple answer is you can't cook deer and kill the prions. That's not an effective way. Lastly, any precautions to take when dressing and cleaning deer and handling deer meat? And absolutely. In general, it's a good rule of practice anyway, aside from CWD, to always wear gloves, always wash your hands. If you're touching the outside or the inside of a deer, minimize contact with the blood. You don't want to nick yourself and get blood in the wound for many reasons. So just follow just regular safety practices, keeping the blood off of you, wash your hands, and that's the best way to go about that.
While Chris is reading that one, I'll take a couple. I've got a couple more on the submitted questions I want to take to. This question was, how specific is or should the harvest location be, i.e. county, PSA, SSA, address? So here's what we do in this possibly. We'll get your harvest ID number. When you submit your sample, we'll get your harvest ID number so we'll know that you killed the deer. And if that sample comes back positive, we're gonna come see you, and we're gonna say, take us to where you killed that deer. That's what we did the last time. We went to the hunter, said, guess what, sorry about this, but take us to where you killed the deer, so that we know where it's at. So that's how we'll be doing it, at least during this surveillance period. So, I don't know many deer hunters who don't know where they killed the deer. But make sure you remember, at least, you don't have to know the exact tree, but get me within 50 yards of it, okay? So we'll be all right. But, so that's how that process works. So really, from the submission and the testing phase, we just need your harvest ID. We'll need to know the county that it's in and all that stuff, and then we'll track it down from there. So, did you have another one in there?
Yeah, pretty good.
Okay, go ahead.
Let me start on, you might jump in.
Okay.
So the question there is whether it's likely or unlikely, if we didn't find any more CWD positive deer in this area, how long would we basically continue to do surveillance? And I guess that's a real optimistic question. I'm an optimist at heart, and I do really, really hope that that is the only one we ever find. I don't think that's very likely, but in that event, this is where I'm looking at Brad again. Brad's our division chief. He calls a lot of the shots. Not all the shots, but a lot of them. I would think that a really good outcome to hope for would be that we go 2 or 3 years with intensive sampling, check thousands of deer, we don't find any more. At that point, I think we would begin to have a conversation about what's the right way to move forward with management or continued monitoring.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we would evaluate that as we moved into our management phase. And New York is the only state I'm aware of who did, was it 1 or 2? Just 1. They found 1 positive deer in New York, and that's been over a decade ago, right?
Yeah, that, very different circumstances.
Very different circumstances. But they only found 1 positive deer. But we were trying to be a little bit optimistic. So I think we would evaluate that. I don't think we would ever stop testing. I think that the answer to that is we would never stop testing. We would never stop looking for it. We might change some of the zones and those kind of things, but I don't think we would ever stop testing for it now that we know we had at least 1 positive. There was a couple of specific questions on here that I wanted to answer. Somebody submitted to those. One of them was from a landowner who actually has folks that hunt on their property, and they wanted to know if the landowner would be made aware of a positive test on their property if they didn't kill the deer. Yes, that would be the case, because we're going to have to go with whoever was the hunter was that killed the deer. So we would certainly know who the property owner was, because that's a matter of record. So we would make sure that the property owner was also aware of that. So if you lease your property to somebody, to the hunters, and they do kill a deer on your property, you know, there will be a mechanism for us to get back to you to let you know. And then there was one. Somebody asked me, could the hunters themselves just pull the lymph nodes and submit them for testing? Not right this second. Let's make sure we get exactly the tissues that we want. Well, you can come to the check station with us, and we'll show you how to do it. You can pull your samples just because it's not that hard to do, and you can do it right there with us. But for right now, we want to make sure that we get the right tissues. Quality control is there. We need to make sure we get those retropharyngeal lymph nodes. So bring us the head, or take it to a Servant Health Cooperative who's had training and knows what to look for and that kind of thing. Maybe if one day we become endemic, and we're apparently out west, some of the states out there let people do it now because they've had it for so long. But for right now, we want to pull the samples, or we want one of our certified Servant Health Cooperators to do it. Got another question, Ryan?
Okay, so this is a good question about the 1 positive deer in Yadkin County. The question is, what prompted to have it tested? What prompted us to test the deer? Was it the condition of the deer, or just a random test? So basically, backstory of the case. So we've been doing surveillance in North Carolina, of course, since 1999. Last year, there was a new detection in southwestern Virginia, Montgomery County, 33 miles from our border, last summer, which prompted, of course, an increase in surveillance statewide in North Carolina. We tried to focus a lot of that effort in the 4 counties closest to those positive counties in Virginia, up in this corner here. So we increased surveillance, putting a lot of effort into it. But the deer that tested positive here in Yadkin County was just another random deer. It appeared normal. The hunter was very helpful when we talked to them about the deer. The deer acted normal. There were no visible signs that that animal was infected. It looked like a healthy 2.5-year-old buck like you would see out in the woods. That hunter actually had trail camera photos of the deer. We were able to look at it. He was very helpful in visiting with us as we looked into the case further, as Brad talked about when we get a positive. I also wanted to mention that this deer, of course, being the first one in the state, we want to be 100% sure that the disease is here and there was no mix-ups. So we did our due diligence to make sure that the sample that tested positive matched the deer in Yadkin County. So we actually obtained a DNA sample from the mount in Yadkin County and matched it genetically with the positive sample that was sent to the lab. So we've done our due diligence and are 100% confident that deer lived and was harvested right there in Yadkin County.
All right, so somebody continue on to check their, find their test results.
Okay, so test results. When you get a deer
They
tested,
didn't know how to find their test results.
go to ncwildlife.org/CWD. It's a link we've been sharing all night. It's everywhere if you go on our website. That is the landing page for all things CWD in North Carolina. We have a statewide surveillance page. You click on there. There's a button that says, see my test results. If you click on that button, you can input your WRC number, and you can look at past harvests, and when your test results are in, they will be posted there immediately. But I would just encourage everyone here, and I think it was mentioned earlier, ncwildlife.org/CWD. The surveillance areas, the rules about surveillance areas, statewide surveillance, everything that we have on CWD and CWD surveillance in the state is there on that page and changes real time as more information comes in.
And so he's right about that. You can also go to your big game harvest reporting screen on the phone or on the web page. And some of you may not know this, but you can go on there and do view my last harvest, and it'll show your test results. And you can also see live harvest updates throughout the hunting season, just in case you're wondering, by county. So that's a good place to go to get those. You ready for that one?
Yeah.
All right, so this question is about feeding and specifically a type of feeder. The question is, would a gravity feeder that holds the food in the trough above the ground instead of on the soil be better? The short answer is probably not. So what we're trying to avoid with feeding is having deer feeding on the exact same location where saliva can be swapped on the food or on the substrate below. So whether that's soil or the feeder, there's still the potential that saliva comes out of the mouth of one deer and then the one following it right away, 2 weeks later, 5 months later, licks that and gets prions from it. So the answer to that would not be more helpful. The next one is regarding minerals. Would feeding minerals be helpful? And I guess I'm interpreting that as helpful to the deer population and even to fighting CWD. And the short answer is no. So with CWD, and we discussed this earlier, it's not like other diseases like a virus or a bacteria, which means there's no immune response. And so the deer's body does not respond to the disease. So having a heightened immune system or it being in better health doesn't help the deer, because what's happening is that all those proteins in its body are just getting converted over to the infectious material.
Any more questions? One more question. I can't go past this thing, they won't let me. They keep fussing at me. I have to stay behind this little piece of paper. At least they ain't told me to stop moving my arms. Well, while we're waiting on this last question here, I think y'all again, and just want to let you know that we're not going anywhere. We're going to hang out here for a while this evening to talk whatever you guys need. Would the internet or call-in program change with either zone?
Within the
Oh, within the zone. There will be some changes to the big game reporting system. When when you call in, instead of just asking you what county did you kill the deer in, it'll ask you, did you kill it in the SSA, did you kill it in the PSA? Is that, Ryan's not here, but that's right? Yeah, so there'll be some changes. It'll be very simple online. If you go online and report it, there'll be a map there and everything. You can say, I killed it right there or whatever. But on the phone, when you do the phone call in, there will be a couple more buttons you'll have to push. If you say, I killed a deer in Yaqui County, it's going to ask you, did you kill it in the PSA or the SSA? What part of the county did you kill it in? It's probably going to be like a punch one for the other, one for the other. And so it's good, and that's just so that we know it was a deer that came out of the PSA, and you need, because we're going to, and we need to know how many samples we're getting out of there. Plus, we're going to have your reported harvest anyway. So, is there anything else to add to that? You guys were working on that. That's a work in progress. It's a lot of, our IT people are on it. Our IT people started on this 2 weeks ago, and so they're on it. We try to make it as user friendly as we can. I encourage you, if at all possible, report your deer online, because that's how I do mine. Because it's way easier. Because I can't never understand the person. I got fussed at for that person on the phone not listening to somebody one time. So I just suggest do it online. Any other questions before I'm going to turn it back over to Director Ingram, and then, like I said, I'll stay here to midnight. They'll probably kick us out of here, but I'll stay out there talking to you if you want me to. But we'll hang around for a while and chat and all that. I thank everybody for watching on Facebook as well. I'll turn it over to you, Director Ingram.
Thank you, Brad. And I'm going to call Representative Jay Adams from North Carolina General Assembly. He's just got a few words to say, and then I'll have some closing remarks.
Well, first thing, thank you for being here. I just want you to know that we have been aware of this for almost 20 years. And in the legislature, I've been harping on it for about 7 years. So this is not something that's new to us. We're very aware of it. The legislature appropriated $500,000 this past year to set up the detection processes that allowed us to locate this deer. So we're aware of it. We're working on it. I would just say this also. I couldn't ask for a better group of people to work on this. I'd a lot rather have a team of really good people to work on a serious problem like this than have a minor problem with an inept team. We're in a good place as far as having to deal with this, and we've got the cooperation of Virginia and Tennessee and all the other states that are affected by it. One other thing I would add to this, if for some reason you inadvertently consume deer that later were to be tested positive for CWD, don't lose your mind over it. There's no evidence that it transmits to human beings. The caution is don't do it intentionally and don't do it continuously. But we'll all work this and we'll all tackle this together. You're part of the team. I'm from Catawba County. I made venison chili day before yesterday. And it's probably my primary source of meat. This is important to us. It's important to you. And we'll learn to manage this. In fact, I'm going to Colorado. I'm hoping I'll get a pull a tag for a mule deer, and I'll go out there and I'll have to go through the whole process, because out there the probability is much, much higher than what we have here, but we'll learn to deal with it. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Representative Adams, and I also want to thank each and every one of you that have tuned in on Facebook or that are here in person tonight. We really appreciate your attendance and your attention to this. And I want to highlight, as Representative Adams has just done, this wildlife team is committed. They're committed to you. They're committed to protecting the resource. And it's as you've seen tonight, it's more than a professional commitment. It's also a personal commitment. And I'll say personally that there's nothing that I would rather do than wake up on a frosty morning during the rut from a tree stand. And the only thing that's better than that is to sit beside my daughter as she is also hunting, so with me. So I hope that the actions that we take together, I've heard together a lot tonight, the actions that we take together, I can watch her sit beside her son or daughter or her grandkids on the actions that we take today. So thank y'all for working together with us. Like Brad said, we will stay here and answer some more questions, but we will have updates frequently. We are committed to that, and we will most likely be back in this town or surrounding towns for more of these town hall meetings. But overall, thank y'all for your support. Thank you.